It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you tonight. We're going to continue reading in our book, By the Shores of Silver Lake, by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Today's chapter is titled The Pilgrim Way. It's chapter 23. One Sunday evening, Pa's fiddle was singing a Sunday tune, and they were all singing heartily with it. When cheerful we meet in our pleasant home, and the song of joy is swelling, do we pause to think of the tears that flow in sorrow's lonely dwelling? Lend us a hand. The fiddle stopped suddenly. Outdoors a strong voice was singing. Lend us a hand to those who are faint and weary. Lend us a hand to those on the pilgrim way. The fiddle squawked in amazement as Pa dropped it on the table and hurried to the door. The cold burst in and the door slammed behind him. Outside it, there was an outburst of voices. Then the door flung open and two snowy men stumbled in, while Pa said behind them, "I'll see to putting up your team. Be with you right away." One of the men was tall and thin. Between his cap and muffler would be like a scarf to keep you covered, and it could cover your face too. Laura saw blue eyes, kind eyes. Before she knew what she was doing, she heard herself screaming, "Reverend Alden! Reverend Alden!" That's another name for pastor. "Not Brother Alden," Ma exclaimed. Why, Brother Alden?" He had taken off his cap, and now they could see his pleasant eyes and his dark brown hair. "We are pleased to see you, Brother Alden," Ma said. "Come to the fire. This is a surprise." And here's a picture of what it looks like. "You are no more surprised than I am, Sister Ingles," said Brother Alden. "I left you folks settled on Plum Creek. I had no idea you're way out west. And here are my little country girls grown into women." Laura could not say a word. Her throat was choked with joy at seeing the Reverend Alden again. But Mary said politely, "We're glad to see you again, sir." Mary's face was shining with gladness, only her sightless eyes were blank. They startled Reverend Alden. He quickly looked at Ma and then at Mary again. "Ma and Mrs. Burst, Mr. and Mr. Boast are neighbors, Reverend Alden," said Ma as she introduced them. Reverend Alden said, "You're all doing some fine singing up when I drove." But Mr. Boast said, "You did some fine singing yourself, sir." I gotta move this just a little bit. There. "Oh, I wasn't the one who joined in," said Reverend Alden. "That was Scotty here. I was too cold, but his red hair keeps him warm. Reverend Stewart, these are old good friends of mine, and they're friends, so we are friends all together." Reverend Stewart was so young that he was not much more of a big boy. His hair was flaming red, his face was red with cold, and his eyes were sparkling cold gray. "Set the table, Laura," Ma said quietly, tying on her apron. Mrs. Boast put on an apron too, and they were all busy poking up the fire, setting the kettle to boil for tea, making biscuits, frying potatoes, while Mr. Boast talked to the visitors who stood in the way, thawing themselves by the stove. Pa came in from the stable with two more men who owned the team. They were homesteaders going out to settle on the Jim River. Laura heard Reverend Alden say, "We are just two passengers. We hear there's a settlement at the Jim, a town named Huron. The Home Missionary Society sent us out to look over the ground and make ready to start a church here or there. I guess there's a town site marked out on the railroad grade," said Pa, "but I never heard of any building except a saloon," which is where they would be drinking alcohol. "All the more reason we should get a church started," Reverend Alden said cheerfully. After the travelers had eaten supper, they came to the door of the pantry where Ma and Laura were washing the dishes. He thanked Ma for a good supper, and then he said, "I'm sorry indeed, Sister Ingles, to see the affliction that has come on Mary." So he called her sister because, as Christians, we're to be brothers and sisters in Christ. An affliction means a suffering, something bad that happened to a person, like Mary going blind. "Yes, Brother Alden," Ma said sadly, "sometimes it's hard to resign to God's will. We all had scarlet fever in our place in Plum Creek, and for a while it was hard to get along. But I'm thankful that all the children were spared to us. Mary is a great comfort to me, Brother Alden. She has never once complained." "Mary is a rare soul and a lesson to us all," said Reverend Alden. "We must remember that whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and a brave spirit will turn all afflictions to good. I don't know whether you and Brother Ingles know that there are colleges for the blind. There's one in Iowa." Ma took tight hold of the edge of the dishpan. Her face startled Laura. Her gentle voice sounded choked and hungry. She asked, "How much does it cost?" "I don't know, Sister Ingles," Reverend Alden answered. "I will make inquiries if you would like." Ma swallowed and went on washing dishes. She said, "We can't afford it, but perhaps later, if it doesn't cost too much, we might somehow manage. I've always wanted Mary to have an education." Laura's heart beat thick and hard. She could feel it beating in her throat, and the wild thoughts fluttered so fast in her mind she did not know what any of them were. "We must trust in the Lord to do all things for our best good, Reverend Alden. We shall have a short prayer meeting, all of us together, when you're finished with the dishes." "Yes, Brother Alden, I should like that," said Ma. "I am sure we all would." When the dishes were done and their hands washed, Ma and Laura took off their aprons and smoothed out their hair. Reverend Alden and Mary were talking together earnestly while Mrs. Boast held grace, and Mr. Boast and the two homesteaders were talking to Reverend Stewart and Pa about the wheat and the oats that he intended to raise as soon as he could get sod broken. Remember, sod is the grass and the grass roots. When Ma came in, Reverend Alden stood up and said they would all have the refreshment of prayer together before saying good night. They all knelt down by their chairs, and Reverend Alden asked God, who knew their hearts and their secret thoughts, to look down on them there and to forgive their sins and help them do right. A quietness was in the room while he spoke. Laura felt as if she were hot and dry, dusty grass parching in the drought, and the quietness of the cool, gentle rain falling on her. So she hadn't got to hear a pastor in so long pray. It felt so refreshing. Everything was simple now that she was so cool and strong, and she would be glad to work hard and go without anything she wanted herself so that Mary could go to college. Then Mr. and Mrs. Bose thanked Brother Alden and went home, and Laura and Carrie brought Carrie's bed downstairs. Ma made it down on the floor by the stove. "We've only the one bed," Ma apologized, "and I'm afraid there's not enough covers for it." "Don't worry, Sister Ingles," said Reverend Alden. "We'll use our overcoats." "We'll be very comfortable, I'm sure," said Reverend Stewart. "I'm glad we are to have found you folks here. We thought we'd have to go all the way to Huron until we saw your light and heard the singing." Upstairs, Laura helped Carrie unbutton in the dark. She tucked the hot flat iron, remember that was the thing they warmed up so their feet could be warm in the bed, close against Mary's feet. As they all snuggled tight together, warm under the icy cold covers, they heard Pa and the travelers still talking and laughing around the fire. "Laura," Mary whispered, "Reverend Alden told me there are colleges for blind people." "What? For blind people?" Carrie whispered. "Colleges," whispered Laura, "where they can get college educations." How can they? I thought you had to read to study." I don't know," Mary said. "Anyway, I couldn't go. It must cost something. I don't suppose there's any chance I could." "Ma knows," Laura whispered. "Reverend Alden told her too." "Maybe you can, Mary." "I hope you can." She took a deep breath and promised, "I will study hard so I can teach school and help." In the morning, the travelers' voices and the clatter of dishes woke her, and she sprang out of bed to dress and hurriedly go downstairs to help Ma. Outdoors was crisp and cold. Sunshine gilded the frosty windows, and in the house everyone was hearty and cheerful. How the travelers did enjoy that breakfast! They praised everything they ate. The biscuits were light and flaky, the fried potatoes were brown and freshly hashed, the slices of fat pork were thin and crisp, and the gravy was smooth and brown and creamy. There was hot brown sugar syrup and plenty of fragrant, steaming tea. "This meat is delicious," Reverend Alden said. "I know it's just fat salt pork, but I've never tasted any like it. Would you tell me how you cook it, Sister Ingles?" Ma was surprised, and Reverend Alden explained. "Scotty's going to stay out here in this missionary field. I've only come out to get him started. He'll be batching and doing his own cooking because he's not married." "Do you know how to cook, Brother Stewart?" Ma asked. And he said he expected to learn by experience. He'd brought supplies: beans, flour, salt, tea, and salt pork. "The meat is easy," said Ma. "Cut the slices very thin and set them on to parboil in cold water. When the water boils, pour it off. Then roll the slices in flour and fry them to brown. When they are crisp, take them out onto a platter and pour some of the fat off. Save it to use for butter. Then brown some flour in the fat left in the frying pan. Pour in some milk and keep stirring it as it boils until the gravy is just right." "Would you mind writing that down?" said Reverend Stewart. "How much flour and how much milk?" "Goodness," said Ma, "I never measured, but I guess I can take a stab at it." She got a sheet of paper and her little pearl-handled pen and the ink bottle. and wrote down her recipes for fried salt pork and gravy, and for sourdough biscuits and bean soup and baked beans, while Laura cleared the table quickly and Carrie ran to ask Mr. and Mrs. Boast to come over for a preaching service. It seemed odd to have church on a Monday morning, but the travelers were starting on the last stage of their journey to Huron, and no one wanted to lose this opportunity to hear a sermon. Pa played the fiddle and they all sang a hymn. Reverend Stewart, with Ma's recipes in his pocket, made a short prayer for guidance in all their worthy endeavors. Then Reverend Alden preached the sermon. After that, Pa's fiddle gaily and sweetly played, and they all sang, "There is a happy land, far, far away, when saints in glory stand, bright, bright as day. Oh, hear the angels sing, glory to the Lord our King." When the team and the wagon were ready to start, Reverend Alden said, "You've had the first church service in this new town. In the spring, I will be back to organize a church." And he said to Mary and Laura and Carrie, "We will have Sunday school too. You can all help with the Christmas tree next Christmas." He climbed into the wagon and went away, leaving them with that to think about and look forward to. Wrapped in shawls and coats and mufflers, they stood watching the wagon go westward onto the untouched snow and leaving the marks of its wheels behind it. The sun shone brightly and the white world glittered in millions of tiny, sharp points of light. "Well," Mrs. Bowes said with a thought, through a fold of the shawl that was drawn over her mouth. So it would be kind of like this. "Well," because she's trying to keep warm, "it's nice to have had the first church service." "What is the name of the town that's going to be here?" Carrie asked. "Doesn't have a name yet, does it, Pa?" asked Laura. "Yes," Pa said. "It's called De Smet. It's named for a French priest who came pioneering out here in the early days. They went into the warm house. That poor boy'll ruin his health most likely," said Ma, "batching all by himself and trying to live on his own cooking." She meant Reverend Stewart. Now see, back in those days, the men did not really cook. Well, obviously if they were bachelors, they had to, or maybe if their wife died. But men did more of the heavy outdoor things, and women kept the house and did the cooking. Now we know that men can cook just as well as women, and women can do many things outside that are heavy too. "He's a Scotch," said Pa, as if that meant he would be all right. "What did I tell you, Ingles, about the spring rush?" said Mr. Boast. "2 homesteaders in here already, and March hardly begun." "That struck me too," said Pa. "I'm making tracks for Brookings tomorrow, rain or shine." So that was another nice surprise they got. And now Pa's got to get to the town and file his claim. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to tell you I love you. I really do. Thank you so much for listening to these stories. I hope you're enjoying them. I'd love to hear a comment from some of you, and maybe some ideas of when I'm done with this, if you would like me to read another series of books. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house, out of your house, in the day and the night. And whatever you do, keep dreaming. Good night.